Good to go.
Thanks. Welcome back to Senate Education, Tuesday, March 21st, 3:09. Hey, thanks for joining us, Jay. We really appreciate it. What we're trying to do here, a couple of things. We'd like to know a little bit of background. It's been reported in the press, your actions related to the, I believe it's called Vermont Christian Academy. And connected to that is just how the VPA operates around school sports. And Jay, I think you've been in this committee when we've talked about it a little bit. I don't know if you know the genesis of why the VPA is in charge of school sports, whether or not you have an opinion if it should continue to be in charge of school sports. What does it look like in other states? For complete transparency, I did ask Ms. St. James to draft a bill. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, if anything, that would sort of look at some of these issues. I mean, and by issues, it's using the VPA. Is that a best practice, or should we be looking at what other states are doing? So it's just something we're jumping into, and just thought we'd start with you, if you could give us some background.
Sure. I thought I was just testifying about that one situation, but I can try to talk to all your topics. Can I ask an unrelated question first?
Sure.
I received several emails today from districts asking about what the status is with the ADM 4-year-olds that have said they're reaching out to people. I've told them I don't know. Is that still going to be discussed this week, or is that someplace else now?
Nope. So what that is that is in the S56 study language that this committee passed out. That was attached to S56.
So I mean, I meant specifically the ADM piece. Is that?
I do not think you will see anything. So this happened a little bit last week, but I can confirm. I do not think this committee is going to move forward with changing the ADM, given that we're focused right now on expanding early childhood education. Given that the estimates of the cost that we would be looking at to change the ADM would cost taxpayers, I'm hearing somewhere in the realm of $15 million. I think it's all eyes on S56 and funding that at this point. But happy to dig in a little bit more with you.
Okay, I just wasn't aware.
That's how we left it. That's how I left it with the pro tem and the chair of health and welfare last week.
Okay. I wasn't aware of the $15 million thing. I'm not sure why it would cost any extra money. It's money we're already spending, I thought. So maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Okay.
In terms of VPA, they were founded in 1915.
Okay.
And essentially they're a member-driven organization. Every single state has the same thing. Has an organization that is made up of their members, that is a nonprofit that oversees sports. Some of those states, I think there's 5, maybe 6, also oversee their principals association. So for example, if you go to Connecticut, they're exactly the same formation as we are. If you go to New Hampshire, that's the only one close to us that's different. And so in New Hampshire, they have an association that's in charge of sports, and they have an association that's in charge of principals. In Vermont, I don't know if it's because of our size or not, in Massachusetts, in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maine, those organizations are the same. And there's one other state, and I can't remember, Senator, what state that is, that's also set up the same way. So they're all voluntary members. Members join. The members together, which is all the schools in the state, get together. They develop the rules themselves. And then the VPA oversees the rules that they establish. All of our committees are made up of principals and athletic directors, some assistant principals, some retired principals. And then on the specific sports committees, there's also usually a coach or an official that's an expert on the subject matter. So for example, in baseball, there's a person who's like the rules interpreter. So that committee meets twice a year. They go over all the baseball rules that come from the National Federation of High Schools, and all of our sports stuff comes from the National Federation of High Schools. That's true in all 50 states. That organization is the umbrella organization That's the one that oversees all the insurance and stuff and all that stuff and helps out each of the states. Then each state has whatever sports it offers and develops their own rules, as long as those rules are not inconsistent with the National Federation of High School rules. So the way we do it is pretty much the same as how it's done in every state, with the exception of most states have a separate organization. They have a VPA, but those people aren't also advocating for kids or legislation like that. They're only doing sports. That's how it works in the country. Any questions about that, or?
No, I think one of the outstanding questions that I have is, from where I'm sitting, this seems to be working, right?
The national statistics will show that Vermont is probably, at the top of the heap. And if you ask people in other states, they will say we are.
Yeah.
I'm all the time to do presentations on our mentoring program, our gender identity type stuff. We're the first state to do that in the United States. Although Wyoming tries to claim they are. I'm not, so maybe we're not first on that, but we're certainly in the first two. Yeah, I think you've got a really good thing here. You've had some real good principals that have really stepped up over the years to try to make this a strong program.
Again, it strikes me as the fact that you've got the principals are the leaders of the institutions engaged and involved. That's important. So if we could go to the Mid-Vermont Christian Academy versus Long Trail School game, and tell us a little bit about what happened and how you all came to your decision.
Okay, so I prepared a little bit of just notes here, so I'm going to look at my notes.
Yeah, please feel free.
So essentially, and the other thing I should mention, you mentioned principals. I think I already said this, but all of the high school athletic directors are very involved in the VPA. On the sports side,
Great.
Often the ADs work more on a day-to-day basis on the sports side than the principals do. And Lauren Thomas, who I brought to your committee,
Yes.
our assistant executive director who's in charge of sports and works closely with all the ADs. Want to make sure you all knew that.
Thank you.
Okay, in terms of this particular situation, so I wasn't going to mention the school's name, but you folks did, and it is public knowledge. So the school in question refused to follow policies that required of all schools, to play against another school because the other school had a transgender student athlete. And from our perspective, more importantly, went to the media and made a media thing out of that situation, which we felt could put the safety of the student and the opposing school and any other students that may be transgender in peril to a host of bigotry. And we saw a lot of that earlier this year in a situation in Randolph, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with, where a student said that a transgender student was changing in their bathroom and was exposing themselves to other kids. And a lot of that stuff was not true, but it still made a lot of headlines and made Fox News and became a real big issue and really difficult for that child and for that school to deal with. And as a result of that, they received a lot of hate mail, attacks on their internet, phone messages that were really inappropriate and stuff. And so normally what we do is we have the activity standards address something, but because this was in the public domain, we went right to our top governing board to make the decision, and that's the executive council. So the executive council and the leadership team, which is me and the associate executive director and the assistant, we made the decision to remove Mid-Vermont Christian from the VPA at that time. Again, because of the public nature of the situation, we decided to have the executive council address it. As I mentioned, it would normally be addressed by the Activity Standards Committee. And any appeal will, of course, follow our regular process. So that would go to the Activity Standards Committee, and I'll talk about that in a second. I should mention, we have received many racist, bigoted, homophobic, and hateful speech directed at us and directed at Vermonters in general since this decision. We have almost 1,000 emails. We have to have armed security at the VPA office now because of some of the threats that have been made against employees of the VPA, which also affects other organizations that are in that building. So it's a pretty big deal. And a number of people have tried to hack our system. Our website's having lots of problems, and our phone messages, we cannot keep up with them because people call and swear and yell and call us homosexual lovers and stuff like that. And it's been pretty disruptive to our organization, to be honest. On the other side of this, over 4 dozen individual members, I'm talking about principals now, have reached out to us thanking us for following VPA policy, following Vermont law, which is what we're following, which requires inclusion for all students with no discrimination allowed for gender identity. And we've had no member schools state that they disagree with our decision. Additionally, many other independent schools and student and human rights organizations have thanked us for our decision. And even the Vermont Independent Schools Association wrote us a letter before the decision condemning the behavior of Mid-Vermont Christian and asking us to enforce VPA policies and Vermont law, especially around issues of discrimination against students. So in general, if a school wants to appeal a ruling that was supported by the executive council, they'll go to the executive council and they'll appeal the ruling. They would need to agree to follow all VPA rules and regulations. And their appeal has to be about what it is they think the VPA got wrong in their decision. It can't be that we think you following the law is wrong, so you need to change the law, because obviously that's not an authority of the VPA. So they would need to agree to follow all VPA rules and regulations, including the provision to not discriminate against protected classes, which in Vermont, I'll remind everybody, includes transgender students at other schools who joined the VPA. And we will be reaching out to the school. They did file an appeal. I'm drafting a letter to them that we will send out in the next couple of days to tell them what they need to do for the appeal, like we would for any other school. And it's important for the committee to know that any school, Mid-Vermont Christian, like any other private school in Vermont, can continue to discriminate against their own students. Private schools do it all the time. The VPA doesn't have oversight on that, and I want to be really clear on that. Once a kid enrolls in your school and they're going to play against other schools and your school has qualified them to play and they are the right age and follow other criteria, then the school has no right to discriminate against another school. And that's the issue here. Mid-Vermont Christian doesn't have to take transgender students on their school, at their school or on their teams. But if they're a VPA school and that's a VPA rule, they still have to participate against other teams if they're going to be in the VPA. That's really the crux of the issue here from our perspective. And then finally, anybody who's watching this at home, people have tried to make this into a case of right and wrong or around religious freedom. It has nothing to do with any of that for us. Most people in our office, including myself, are Christians. But for us, it's pretty simple. We have to follow Vermont law, and our policies reflect Vermont law, and we're going to continue to do so. So I think any questions you have, senators.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, straightforward, honest.
Good.
No.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. And so, and just so it's clear to me, Mr. Nichols, so the VPA adopts or of course is following Vermont's anti-discrimination policies, simple as that, Vermont's public accommodation law. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but further, we have policies, and I think the first 2 policies are about this. I don't have them open right in front of me. Give me 30 seconds. First policy in our policy book is commitment to racial, gender fair, and disability awareness. And that's right there. Every team, every school, that joins the VPA agrees to follow those policies. And our second one is policy on gender identity. These are both policies that have come out in the last 10 years or so, and they all reflect Vermont law, which we have to do. We can't create a policy just like a school board that's in violation of Vermont law.
I do kind of a related question. I understand some of the limitations that you're under here. I'm just curious about changing rooms and restrooms in public schools. Is this the same that gender identity dictates the changing room or the restroom that the student utilize?
Yeah, so but most schools have done it. First of all, perhaps when I went to school, it was common for kids to get fully naked in a locker room and take a shower. Nobody does that anymore. I don't know of any schools that do that. I've talked to principals about this, and none of them seem to know of any that really do that. But yeah, that's the basic thing. Now, sometimes kids won't feel, you might change into your underwear or whatever you're going to wear. most sports in Vermont, the kids are already changed before they even get in the locker room. The only sports really that might be a question for would be for an indoor sport like basketball or hockey. Kids might actually change in the locker room. Most sports, kids don't change in the locker room. My experience as a coach, I coach girls basketball, and the girls might get in the locker room at different times to change. A lot of times they had their uniforms on underneath their dress clothes anyway. Was never really that big a deal. I do know a lot of schools, because of your question, Senator, are trying to go to like gender neutral bathrooms and have just like one bathroom, so we don't have put any kids in a position where they feel it's awkward for them. And certainly kids can ask to change in a different room. Kids do that all the time, and schools always accommodate that, to my knowledge. But that is a concern that some people have brought up. And the other concern that people have brought up is that males get bigger, faster, stronger, earlier. And so that's a concern that some people have brought up, and we're not disputing that one way or the other. But in Vermont, I mean, in the NCAA, it's important to realize that no kids in Vermont are losing scholarships because of any of this stuff. Because in Vermont, we go by gender identity. The NCAA actually has a physical test they have to do where there's a certain amount of testosterone, you qualify as a male or whatever, and they've got their own rules. So if I decided my gender identity was to be, I felt like I was a girl and wanted to identify as a girl, I have to do it in all aspects of my life. I can't just do it for hockey season because I want to play hockey on the girls' team or whatever. And when I do that, it's not going to give me a scholarship anyway because the NCAA doesn't allow that. They actually do some type of testosterone test at the college level for scholarships. So it's not the same as it is in the states. And states are different. We have states that have rules that do not allow students to play based on their gender identity. So basically those kids don't play. And the research is pretty clear. Those kids are 4 or 5 times more likely to commit suicide, much more likely to drop out of school, much more likely to be depressed. And our philosophy has been, as a state, trying to include everybody and being inclusive. And if the state ever chooses to change the law, then VPA would have to follow whatever that law was. But I actually think, at least for high school kids, we've got it right.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Appreciate that. You might get some individual follow-up from committee members who have heard from constituents, other questions. And I'll just ask Hayden to send your email around to the committee just so everyone has it.
Yeah, feel free. If I can answer a question, I will. If I can't, I'll get it to one of the sports people that can.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, great to see you.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, committee, that concludes our work for the day. Unless somebody else has something they want to raise related to this or anything else.